Atrocities against women in Afghanistan is only growing with each passing day. In the latest, a former female Afghan lawmaker was shot dead along with her bodyguard by unknown assailants at her residence in Kabul, according to a spokesperson of the Kabul Security Department. Mursal Nabizada, who had been a member of parliament in the former U.S.-backed government, was killed by unknown gunmen in Kabul city. She was a member of the Parliamentary Defense Commission and worked at a private non-governmental group. Nabizada was elected in 2019 and stayed in office until the Taliban takeover. She was one of the few female parliamentarians who continued living in Kabul after the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. In August of 2021, the Taliban regime had earlier provided assurances on how they would not engage in systematic retribution and offered protection to the women of Afghanistan. But the ground reality is exactly the opposite. Nabizada's assassination marked the first time a politician from the ousted government was killed under the Taliban regime. She was among the few politicians who had decided against fleeing Afghanistan. According to police officials, the shooting took place at around 3 a.m. local time on Sunday. Her brother and a second security guard were also injured in the attack. A third security guard fled the scene with money and jewelry. She died on the first floor of her home, which was used as her office. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, and a probe is still underway. The Taliban earlier ordered a ban on women's beauty parlors. Women are not allowed to step out of their homes without a male relative, not allowed to go to gyms or parks, or even continue their studies. The women in Afghanistan have been relegated to live like second-class citizens.
Challenges they face away on the field.
For more on this tragic story and the situation in Afghanistan, we're joined by journalist and expert in Afghan affairs, Lynn O'Donnell. Thank you so much for joining us, Lynn. You know, this issue of the female lawmaker really comes at a time when we hear so many gruesome stories and disturbing stories come out of Afghanistan. How do you interpret this murder? How big is this?
Well, I think for Mursal Nabizada's family, it's very big indeed. It may be coincidental that she was a woman, maybe rather that she was a former member of parliament. It sounds like it could be an inside job. As you said, the third security guard fled with jewelry and possibly money as well. It could be that she was murdered by the Taliban and this line is being trotted out to deflect attention away from them. There's an awful lot of retributive violence going on in Afghanistan against people who are associated with the former government, the republic that fell in August in 2021. People who were members of the government, worked for the government, who were members of the security forces on behalf of the republic, as well as ethnic minorities. And as you say, women are bearing the brunt of the Taliban's violent policy. So it's very difficult to know where on the scale of atrocity Mursal Nabizada's murder fits in, because atrocity has just become a part of the landscape. Unfortunately, it seems to be the accepted landscape of Afghanistan under Taliban rule.
Right, and there's this growing concern about the aid that's being sent to the Taliban. On the one hand, a humanitarian aid, but then on the other hand, there are people in Afghanistan who are really in need of these vital humanitarian aid, notably because of food. Where do we stand regarding how the Taliban is distributing this kind of aid? Is there some kind of accountability when the United Nations, for example, does provide millions of dollars in aid to a regime like the Taliban without any accountability or assurances, at least, maybe some form of deal? And then, this money goes into Afghanistan. The Taliban acts like this, and then we really don't know how the money is being spent ultimately. and poverty continues to prevail.
Yeah, poverty, as you say, prevails. I mean, there's been a lot of revisionism since the fall of the republic about how bad it was beforehand. Afghanistan was one of the poorest countries in the world, and its government one of the most corrupt. And billions of dollars did disappear into the pockets and coffers of privately and well-connected people and government officials under the Republic as well. Things have got measurably worse under the Taliban because there is no effort to build an economy, create jobs, enable people to look after themselves, earn their own money. And as was before the Taliban's takeover, it has continued to be reliant on international aid. The United States intelligence services have just released a report that say this is likely to prevail and get worse up until 2024 or 25 because the Taliban is prioritizing its own power and its own policies. And so what that means, according to people who I have talked to inside Afghanistan and outside, is that the Taliban controls the distribution of food and cash aid. And so the United Nations, which has about, more than a dozen, up to 24 agencies based and operating in Afghanistan, sends the money into a bank there. It's distributed to the agencies, and then those agencies distributed in turn across the country. What they don't have control over is what happens to the cash and the aid after it's been distributed to people on their list. And in some parts of the country, these UN agencies and other NGOs don't even have control over who's on the list of recipients of the aid. And so it is in the Taliban's interest, especially with all the challenges that they're facing, not only in keeping their own supporters, traditional supporters on side, but in deflecting the influence of organizations, for instance, like ISIS, which have a presence in Afghanistan, is they're making sure or trying to make sure that they maintain their own levels of support by distributing that aid to people whose support they need. As you say, the United Nations and other agencies have absolutely no way of knowing what happens to that aid after it leaves their control, and they have no accountability to people like you and I whose taxes support their efforts, and they have no accountability, and they will not answer questions about accountability of where that aid goes. They certainly won't answer my questions, and none of the efforts that they've made at public explanation of their aid activities says where does it go and how do we guarantee it gets to where we say it's going. It's a very poor effort.
Yeah, very difficult. Lynn O'Donnell, thank you so much for joining us on WION and shedding some much needed light on such a complicated topic. We hope to have you back soon. Thank you.